I never imagined my life would unravel in this way, not in America, where I believed opportunity and fairness formed the bedrock of every partnership. But life has a way of teaching you, brutally at times, that not all smiles are genuine and not every handshake is honest. My name is Rachel Carter, and this is the story of how my family and I took back what was stolen from us, and why I no longer believe in the kindness of business partners. Friends, you enjoy listening to stories, but you don't subscribe to the channel or like the videos. I request you to please subscribe to the channel right now so that I get more motivation to bring you even more stories. If you help me reach 1,000 subscribers, I promise to bring you extremely best stories with a truly real feel, so go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and now let's move on to today's story. When I moved to Austin, Texas 10 years ago with my husband Michael, I carried nothing but ambition in my heart. I was fresh out of business school, burned from years of working in small accounting firms, and determined to finally build something of my own. Michael was supportive in his easygoing way, preferring his stable engineering job but championing every crazy idea I whispered into his ear at midnight. It wasn't until I met Jonathan Ross, our soon-to-be business partner, that things seemed to align. Jonathan had the charisma of a preacher and the kind of money that made everything feel possible. He wanted to invest in something with soul, as he put it. I had the concept, a chain of wellness cafes that would fuse nutritious food with community spaces, yoga classes upstairs, and locally sourced goods for sale. It felt ahead of its time in 2016, and we were certain we'd strike gold. I brought in my younger brother Daniel for operations and my mother, Lorraine, who had run a bakery for 20 years, to manage the kitchen. It wasn't just a business, it was a family enterprise, something authentic and grounded in trust. That trust would be our undoing. The first 2 years were a blur of late nights, spilled coffee, burnt granola batches, and open mic nights where our cafe buzzed with laughter and music. I watched profits triple. 2 cafes became 4. From the outside, it looked like success. From the inside, I began to notice Jonathan's grip tightening. He had that kind of smile that felt reassuring in public but made your stomach knot in private. The day it all fell apart was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday mornings were delivery days, when the scent of fresh produce filled our central Austin cafe. I walked into our office upstairs, arms full of supplier receipts, only to find Jonathan sitting behind my desk, the desk he'd once said belonged to the heart and brain of the business, meaning me. He was flanked by 2 lawyers, men with cold eyes and sharper suits. The papers were ready, contracts that stripped me of my stake, citing mismanagement of finances as justification. "You should have read the fine print, Rachel," he said smoothly, tapping the documents with his manicured finger. "You signed over majority control 2 years ago. I needed you at the beginning, but businesses grow up. It's time for the professionals now." Professionals. That one word stabbed me deeper than his betrayal. Professionals, as if my brother's 16-hour workdays didn't count. As if my mother's cracked hands from early morning baking weren't professional. As if my sacrifices and sleepless nights were childish hobbies, not the backbone of his empire. Jonathan took everything. The cafes, the yoga space, the brand I had built with sweat and love. Overnight, my family was shoved out. He didn't just betray us, he humiliated us. He used my name to attract investors, then erased it when money started flowing in. And just like that, the dream was gone. For weeks I couldn't leave the house. Michael tried to cheer me up with his steady optimism, but I was drowning in something larger than grief. It was a mix of rage and humiliation, the sense of being duped in a country where I thought opportunity was tied to merit, not manipulation. One night, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh cornbread between us. "Rachel," she said, her voice steel under velvet. "We Carters don't roll over. He thinks he won? Then he doesn't know us." The spark lit then. Revenge wasn't just an impulse, it was justice. And justice, we decided, wouldn't come from courts. Lawyers were on Jonathan's payroll. Justice would come from us. Family meetings became war councils. Daniel, with his sharp mind, mapped out Jonathan's empire. He had contacts, suppliers who'd been mistreated, employees who'd been underpaid, and investors itching for dirt. Michael worked on the tech side, tracing Jonathan's financials, spotting dubious transfers and offshore accounts. As for me, I carried the rage and turned it into strategy. I knew Jonathan's weaknesses. His hunger for status. His vanity, always craving media praise. His careless arrogance that made him underestimate the little people. We made a pact, one late Friday night. We would not stop until Jonathan was ruined. Not just bankrupt, but humiliated, the way he had humiliated us. This wouldn't be about gunfights or Hollywood explosions. Our revenge would be methodical, precise, and devastating. And it would come, not just from me, but from the family he'd dared to spit on. I never thought betrayal would come from someone I trusted more than anyone outside my family. My name is Rachel Carter, and if you're reading this, let me be clear from the beginning, this isn't a tale about forgiveness, or moving on, or finding peace in meditation circles. This is about revenge, about taking back what was stolen from me, my family, and the dream we'd built with our blood and sweat. When I first arrived in Austin, Texas, I was still glowing with new ambition. I was 33 then, married to Michael, who worked as a civil engineer with steady pay and steady habits. Michael was the kind of man who didn't rock the boat but always made sure we had somewhere safe to land. His belief in me was unshakable, and back then, it was the only fuel I needed. I had just left behind years in corporate accounting, a regimented, joyless grind where I buried myself in spreadsheets while men with louder voices and weaker ideas stole credit. I wanted more. I wanted something that wasn't just profitable but meaningful, rooted in my passion for health, community, and reinventing the way people thought about food and togetherness. That's how the idea of Whole and Well Cafes was born, a place that wasn't just a spot to grab coffee but a sanctuary. Fresh juices, organic meals crafted with love, yoga and meditation spaces upstairs, live music on the weekends, a hub where wellness and community merged. It wasn't just a business plan. It was my soul on paper. And then Jonathan Ross walked in. Jonathan was introduced to me at a networking dinner by a mutual acquaintance. He was older than me by maybe 15 years, tall with flecks of gray in his slicked back hair, always dressed like he was about to step onto a magazine cover. The kind of man whose handshake gripped too long and whose smile seemed permanent but hollow. "I've been looking for something fresh," he said that evening, swirling his glass of wine as if the world were his stage. "Something with heart, but also scalable. You're onto something here, Rachel. And I'd like to help." I should have felt the warning signs even then, the ease with which he spoke, the way he made promises without substance. But when someone shows up offering money you desperately need, with validation you've been craving for years, you don't always notice the cracks in the glass. He put down the seed money. Enough to open our first cafe in a busy corner of downtown Austin. He signed on not just as an investor but as a partner. And for a while, it was magic. I didn't want this to just be mine. I pulled in the people I trusted most, my brother Daniel, who had a sharp mind for operations and logistics, the kind of man who spotted inefficiencies before anyone else. My mother Lorraine, with 2 decades of experience running her own bakery, became the beating heart of the kitchen. And Michael, my husband, lent his skills in setting up the technology we need to manage the operation. We weren't just running a business. We were building an inheritance, a legacy we could be proud of. Those first 2 years were electric. The cafe was always buzzing, filled with yoga mats at dawn and guitar music at dusk. Reviews poured in from local bloggers, then regional newspapers. 2 cafes became 4. Suddenly, Whole and Well was being whispered about as the next big franchise. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. And still, there was Jonathan. Always in the background at first, showing up for photo ops, shaking hands with suppliers, charming investors. He loved being associated with the vision, basking in the glow we had created. I can still remember him putting an arm around me during one interview, his teeth blinding under studio lights. "She's the brains, I'm the brawn," he joked, and I laughed because I didn't know yet what sort of brawn he meant. It started with tiny shifts, so small I almost convinced myself they were nothing. Jonathan began calling himself the founder in passing conversations, sometimes to investors I hadn't met. He renegotiated supplier contracts without looping me in, somehow always making it sound like he had saved me trouble. He started spending less time at the cafes themselves and more time courting the press, always expanding the narrative with his voice. One night, over dinner, Michael mentioned something I hadn't considered. "You ever look at the paperwork, Rachel?" "Of course I did," I shot back. "I wouldn't have signed without." But then I froze. Had I looked closely enough? In the whirlwind of excitement, the rush to launch, I'd trusted Jonathan's lawyers to finalize all the fine print. I had let my eagerness blind me. I pushed the worry aside that night, but a part of me already knew the answer. The real blow came on a Tuesday morning. Tuesdays were delivery days. The cafe smelled of oranges, kale, and wheatgrass, earthy and alive as crates filled the back room. I climbed the stairs to our small office overlooking the cafe, holding receipts in my hand, only to find Jonathan sitting behind my desk. Two men in suits flanked him, lawyers, their faces blank, sharp. A stack of paperwork lay on the desk in front of him. "Rachel," Jonathan said smoothly, leaning back in my chair as though he owned the place. "We need to have a little talk." I felt my cheeks tighten. "What the hell are you doing in my office?" He gestured toward the documents. "Correction. Our office. And soon, not yours at all. You see, Rachel, you should have read the details in your contract. You signed over majority control to me years ago. Voting rights, management rights, it's all there. You've been mismanaging finances, and as majority partner, I'm moving to protect the company." I looked down at the pages. Mismanagement. What mismanagement? I had sacrificed everything for this company. How dare he? You can't just. Jonathan leaned forward, smiling patiently, like a teacher scolding a naive student. "I already have. These gentlemen will see you out. You're free to stay on as an advisor for appearances, but mercy only goes so far. Whole and well is mine now." I don't remember walking out. Only the heat in my throat, the weight in my chest, the cold slap of humiliation crawling over every inch of me. I went home and collapsed into bed, and for days I shut the world out. Michael brought food I didn't touch. Daniel called, cursing into the phone, vowing to fight. My mother cried quietly in her own kitchen, not wanting me to hear. Finally, one night, my mother came over, carrying cornbread fresh from the oven. She set it before me and looked me dead in the eye. "Rachel Carter," she said, her voice sharp and steady, "we Carters don't lie down and play dead. That man stole from us. He thinks it's over? He doesn't know who he's up against." That was the night something inside me snapped. I realized this wasn't about despair anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about revenge. And revenge, as I discovered, has its own kind of nourishment. The night my mother told me we'd fight back, I felt the emptiness in my chest start to find fuel. Anger is strange that way, it can devour you, but if you learn how to feed it, it can sharpen into something useful. The next morning, I called Daniel and Michael back into our kitchen, the same wooden table where my family had shared ideas, meals, and dreams long before Jonathan ever appeared. I was still bruised, the weight of his betrayal pressing against my ribs, but I forced my voice to steady. "We're not taking this lying down," I said. "Not this time." "He wants a war?" "He just declared it." Daniel grinned darkly. "Now that's the Rachel I know." Michael's eyes were cautious, but behind them I saw his loyalty steady as a lighthouse. "If you're sure about this," he said slowly, "we'll do it as a family. Together." And so our kitchen turned into a war room. The plan didn't come all at once, not like in the movies where revenge arrives perfectly gift-wrapped. It came in fragments, in whispers over midnight coffee, in furious scribbles on yellow legal pads, in hours of research punctuated by sighs and silence. We mapped Jonathan's empire on the dining table with sticky notes and markers. Each cafe hub. Each supplier. Each investor. The web of connections was messy but enlightening. What Jonathan had built was large, but it wasn't invincible. In fact, the bigger the empire, the bigger the cracks. Daniel, organized and relentless, dug through logistics. He found ex-employees who'd been dropped without notice, contractors Jonathan had underpaid, and suppliers who had long grudges simmering. He made calls, discreet ones, testing the waters of dissent. Revenge, he taught me, thrived best when others had reasons of their own to see someone fall. Michael, on the other hand, became our eyes in the shadows. He had always been good with systems, and Jonathan had been arrogant enough to centralize all franchise data into one shared hub. Michael didn't need to hack. He just followed the sloppy trails Jonathan's ego had left behind. And what he found made my stomach coil: offshore accounts, inflated invoices, sloppy tax adjustments. Jonathan hadn't just stolen from us. He had been stealing from everyone. And me? I became the strategist. I understood Jonathan's mind, his weakness for attention, his insatiable hunger for control. He wanted a spotlight, wanted to be worshipped as some visionary pioneer. That vanity would be the noose. It started small. We didn't strike all at once, no, that would have been reckless. Instead, we planted seeds. Daniel contacted a supplier Jonathan had screwed over, a small organic farmer couple just outside Austin. They'd lost thousands thanks to Jonathan manipulating their contracts. With our help, they quietly spread the word through the small business grapevine. Suddenly, more suppliers were wary. Deals were delayed. Deliveries slowed. Michael pulled financial reports and presented them to a friend he trusted who worked in local journalism. Anonymous tips, he called them, carefully timed so that nothing traced back to us. The first article appeared in a local business blog. Whole and Well founder faces allegations of unethical accounting. It didn't catch fire immediately, but the spark was there. Meanwhile, I did what I had always done best, I smiled. I reconnected with old investors under the guise of casual lunches. I listened, I sympathized, and I hinted. I let them wonder if they'd made a mistake backing Jonathan. I didn't need to lie, I only fed them little truths, sharpened like shards of glass. Reputation, I learned, is more fragile than glass. Once cracks appear, it only takes the tiniest pressure to make it shatter. By month 3 of our quiet campaign, Jonathan was restless. I saw him once at a charity gala, preening in his tuxedo, his laugh louder than ever, his hand gripping his wine glass tighter than necessary. He came over, flashing his too-perfect smile like a weapon. "Rachel," he purred. "How's obscurity treating you?" I matched his smile. "You'll find out soon enough." He laughed, tossed his head back, but for the briefest second, his eyes narrowed, trying to gauge just how much I knew. And in that moment, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since his betrayal, Jonathan was afraid. The real satisfaction came when we escalated. Michael uncovered wire transfers to an offshore shell company, traced perfectly into Jonathan's personal accounts. Daniel found workers from the Dallas cafe who hadn't been paid overtime in 6 months. And I twisted the knife by orchestrating one last step, the media. Through carefully placed leaks, we made sure the press latched onto the stories. Not all at once, but in waves. First came whispers of labor violations. Then the tax rumors. Then the offshore money scandal. Each headline chipped away at his carefully manicured image. By the time national news picked up the story, Jonathan wasn't smiling anymore. Investors panicked. Suppliers sued. Workers protested outside the flagship Austin cafe. Jonathan tried to cover it with PR statements, but every new scandal made him look more desperate. It was Daniel who put the final piece in motion. "We don't just want him ruined," he said one night, eyes glittering under lamplight. "We want him embarrassed. We want his empire to collapse on itself for everyone to see." So we did something bold. We bought back into our brand, but quietly. Under shell companies, we acquired stakes in 2 of the struggling locations Jonathan was trying to offload. We propped them up, made them thrive again under hidden ownership, while his other cafes bled. Jonathan thought he was shoving us out. Instead, we were eating him from the inside. The night the first national magazine cover hit stands with Jonathan's face under the headline "From Visionary to Villain," I sat at my mother's kitchen table with Daniel and Michael. We didn't toast champagne or scream with delight. We simply sat in quiet satisfaction, the kind only family bound by fury can share. I placed the magazine on the table and traced his photo with my finger. "You stole from me, Jonathan," I whispered. "You thought we were weak. But you forgot one thing. Family doesn't quit. Family doesn't forgive." And I meant every word. Because this was only the beginning. By the time the second wave of scandals hit the news, Jonathan Ross was stumbling. His magazine covers had shifted from glossy success stories to bitter autopsies of his crumbling empire. Still, I knew Jonathan, he was slippery. He wasn't the type to collapse gracefully. And I had no interest in letting him slink away with his money intact or with whispered opportunities waiting overseas. No, I wanted him finished. We continued to wait, moving carefully in shadows while Jonathan scrambled to keep his stage lights shining. Behind closed doors, investors demanded answers. Suppliers cut ties. His lawyers worked overtime drafting limp denials. Publicly, Jonathan was a man still trying to grin. Privately, he was bleeding out. And we were ready to deliver the final cut. Daniel was the one who suggested we reach out further. "We're not the only ones he's screwed," he reminded me. "We found farmers, ex-workers, but what about the real players? The ones with money and power he crossed?" It took weeks, but eventually, we assembled a smaller circle, former business partners, minor investors, a marketing director Jonathan had once humiliated and shoved aside. Each of them had their own stories of betrayal. Each had a grievance they'd tucked away, convinced they'd never see justice. When they realized we were serious, that we weren't just angry but organized, they joined us. Quietly. Eagerly. And slowly the circle of dissent around Jonathan became less a rumor and more a movement. I remember sitting across from one of those men, a weary investor who had lost almost $500,000 to Jonathan's double dealing. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you're really going to bring him down, make sure you bury him. Don't give him space to crawl back." I nodded. Because burying him was the only outcome I wanted. We couldn't just rely on scandals bleeding him dry. Jonathan was still trying to court new backers, desperate to pivot into new ventures outside whole and well before the brand collapsed entirely. That was where my knowledge of Jonathan's weaknesses came in. Greed makes men blind, but vanity keeps them blind long past the warning signs. We baited him with exactly what he couldn't resist, a too-good-to-be-true partnership. Through one of our shelf friends, a wellness tech startup, Daniel dressed up with polished decks and staged buzz, we let him find us. We dropped hints through contacts that new investors were looking to merge health apps with cafe culture, a brand that could revolutionize the wellness industry. Jonathan bit faster than even I expected. I met him in a sleek borrowed office space in downtown Austin, dressed sharp, hiding the adrenaline burning in my veins. He strutted and still trying to look like the king of wellness. But his suit was looser now, his tie crooked at the knot, the shine dimming. "Rachel," he said with mock delight, though the smirk faltered at the edges. "I didn't expect you to still be relevant." "I always find my way back," I told him softly. "You taught me that." When I laid the bait of a merger funded by fake tech investors, his arrogance did the rest. He salivated at the idea of being part of the next big innovation, selling us as his comeback story. He didn't vet us deeply. He didn't question why the lawyers seemed new, why the branding materials were too polished. He signed non-disclosures, exchanged proposals, and gave us everything. Financials. Off-the-books arrangements. Personal transfers. Even notes on investors he was still trying to charm. All of it. Right into our hands. Information is powerful, but information in the right place at the right time is lethal. Daniel and Michael worked night after night, assembling a full timeline of Jonathan's corruption. Offshore transfers. Fake invoices. Tax evasion. Labor law violations. Fraudulent representations to investors. It wasn't a scandal anymore, it was a case. And we didn't take it to lawyers. Not yet. We took it to the stage Jonathan loved most, the media. Through the journalists we'd already fed smaller scandals to, we released the full dossier under the guise of anonymous whistleblowers inside Whole and Well. Within 72 hours, it wasn't just a local story. It was national, a headline storm spreading across every major outlet. Wellness mogul Jonathan Ross exposed in full-blown fraud scandal. Ross used offshore shells, investor money to inflate personal wealth. Employees described toxic, abusive workplace under former founder. There was no coming back from this. The empire he'd stolen, the one he humiliated us to build, was now a bonfire, and the whole country was watching him burn in it. The last time I saw Jonathan in person was at a courthouse in Austin, 3 months after the media storm. He looked nothing like the man I had first met. Gaunt. Sweating. His once slick hair limp against his forehead. He avoided my gaze as reporters swarmed him, shouting questions about tax fraud and labor violations. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. His empire had crumbled, his investors had turned, his lawyers were abandoning ship, and his name was ruined beyond repair. But I did whisper something to myself as I watched him disappear into the courthouse doors. You stole my dream, Jonathan. But you gave me something better, the kind of fire I didn't know I had. And now, that fire has taken everything you built. Revenge doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase the humiliation, the sleepless nights, or the ache in your chest when you realize how much you lost in the first place. But it does clear the ground. And on clear ground, something new can grow. A year later, my mother, my brother, Michael, and I reopened a cafe. Smaller. Humble. Under a different name. But it was ours, truly ours this time. The customers knew the story, and they came not just for the food but for the resilience. For the proof that family isn't easily broken. Jonathan Ross? Last I heard, he was penniless, drowning in lawsuits, a man who had once owned the spotlight but now couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone whispering his name with disgust. And me? I tell this story not because I'm proud of the path we took, but because I came to learn something vital. You can lose everything, your business, your name, your dignity, and still find power again. Because when you stand with your family, when revenge burns bright enough, you learn that no partner, no thief, and no betrayal can destroy you completely. Jonathan tried. And he failed. This is my story. This is our revenge. When the storm finally passed, I remember waking up one morning and realizing, for the first time in months, that no part of me was clenched in dread. The headlines had shifted to new scandals, Jonathan's name pushed into the growing graveyard of fallen moguls. Our war was over. And yet, there was a strange quiet. Revenge burns hot, but when the flames die down, you're left with silence. At first, it felt emptier than I expected. I had spent so long plotting, striking, and tearing down that when it was done, I wondered, what now? It was Michael who pulled me back. One evening, while washing dishes side by side, he said, "We fought because Jonathan stole from us. But we can't let him define the rest of our lives. Let's build again, Ratch. Let's build for us." And in that moment, I understood. Revenge had cleared the ground. But it was up to us to decide what rose from the ashes. We didn't chase another franchise. Not at first. We opened one cafe in East Austin. Just one. Small, cozy, deliberately human. Its walls weren't hung with glossy branding but with photos of families, handwritten quotes from regulars, and shelves lined with my mother's homemade pastries. We named it Harvest House. Not flashy. Not built to be copied or franchised. Built to be ours. And it thrived, not because it was trendy, but because it was honest. People came not just for the food, but for the story. They wanted to see resilience, to share a space born from crashing and rising again. Every day, as I walked in and smelled fresh bread and roasting coffee, I remembered those humiliating days when Jonathan sat smirking behind my desk. The memory still stung, but it also hardened into something powerful. A warning. A reminder. A scar that kept me vigilant. I still hear rumors about Jonathan Ross. Bank accounts frozen. Lawsuits pending. Last I heard, he moved to a cramped apartment in Miami, where he tried to pitch some half-hearted consulting business. But the thing about humiliation is, it follows you. Every time he stepped into a room, people remembered. Every time he introduced himself, someone raised an eyebrow. Jonathan will never escape the shadow of his own greed. And me? I don't think about him much anymore. Not in anger, and not even in satisfaction. He's just gone. A ghost of a man who once thought he could put his name on my dream. Sometimes, late at night when the cafe is quiet and the lights are dim, I whisper a thank you to him, not for what he did, but for what he forced me to become. Stronger. Sharper. Unwilling to ever be underestimated again. He broke us, yes. But he also revealed the unbreakable threads that tie my family together. If there's one truth I carry now, it's this: family is the greatest weapon. Jonathan had money, lawyers, and clout. But we had loyalty, trust, and rage sharpened into purpose. When he stole from me, I thought he'd stolen my future. But in truth, he handed me the fire I'd been lacking all along. We took back more than just our pride, we took back proof that no betrayal, however deep, can stand against a family unwilling to surrender. So if you've ever been broken, humiliated, shoved aside by someone who thought they were untouchable, remember this. They're not untouchable. Not if you fight. Not if you stand with your own. I did. And that's why Jonathan Ross doesn't own my story anymore.